Well, good morning. I'm Valerie Jarrett, and I'm just delighted to be here with this terrific panel of women who I will introduce to you in a moment. In any crowded room where you go these days, the topic of childcare and elder care is front and center. Everyone's facing the challenges of managing their obligations at work, trying to generate enough income to take care of their families, and their responsibilities outside of work. Few facts. Right now, nearly half of our workforce is comprised of women. 40% of working moms are either the sole or primary breadwinner. In 60% of families with children, both adults are working. All adults are working. We are also seeing our population age. In the year 2000, we had approximately 30 million Americans who were over the age of 65. By 2030, we expect that number to double, the majority of who will be over 85, so our population is really aging. And new challenges are presented by that, obviously. We also know that 62% of caregivers are women. And the women who are caregivers are 2.5 times more likely to live in poverty. All of that means there are challenges that we need to face if we expect for the United States to remain globally competitive. Our employers are going to have to figure out better ways of adjusting to the needs of the 21st century worker. And that's about what we're going to be talking about right now. And so join me as I introduce to you our panel. So immediately on my right is Betty Easley. Betty is what we call a military family. Her husband, Greg, suffered a traumatic brain injury in the year 2003. And to add on to that, believe me, Betty has 6 children, 2 sets of twins. Yeah, exactly. Pretty amazing person. We call her Superwoman. Next to her is Sheila Marcelo, the founder and CEO of Care.com. Her company provides caregiving services in 16 countries around the world. Next to Sheila is Shelby Ramirez Martinez, who's an activist with 9 to 5, a not-for-profit that advocates for the provision of paid leave, a subject that's really important to the conversation we're going to have. And next to her is Katherine Zunski. Katherine is the co-founder of PowerToFly, a fast-growing platform connecting women across the world who want to work and want to do it from just about anywhere. And Katherine figures out how to help them do that. So let's begin with Betty. Betty, I want you to share with the audience your story. But before you begin, I want to say thank you. I think that too often in our country, we don't appreciate the sacrifices that servicemen and women make day and night for us around the globe, putting their life in harm's way. And we call their families military families because truly they're all serving. And so before we begin, how about a round of applause for Betty for her service? So if you would share with us a little bit of your story and the challenges you faced when Greg came home and how that impacted your life, your work, your family.
Yes. Good morning. My husband, Greg, was injured, and he went undiagnosed for 6 years. We parent 6 children together. He's deployed twice. He went down 14 months. He came home for 7 months. At this time, the youngest twins were 7 months. Our oldest child was 7 years old. So everybody was pretty young. I was in full mommy mode. I saw little things when Greg would return home, but, you kind of see things and like, you don't really pay it too much attention. So he went once, came back, went back a second time. So now he's home for good, and we really struggled as a family. There was so much anger. I would see my babies were growing up before me, but I noticed so many changes. We were living with the invisible wounds of war. You can look at our family of 8, and you really would not see anything wrong. You would think, oh, look at the military family. It looks like such a perfect family. But the reality is that there are invisible wounds of war. Greg went undiagnosed for 6 years. He suffered rank loss twice. It's called demotion in the military. He was demoted twice. which caused us to receive no pay a couple of times. This was 1 year, and then the next year. This was all due to his traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. He suffered head, neck, and back injury. So his PTSD at the time was causing him to not able to concentrate, which caused behavior issues in the military. And you know, the military is disciplined. So when he would forget things and do things that would just look like you're outright being defiant, he was sick. It was a psychological sickness. You couldn't see it. So this is the invisible wounds of war. So he was demoted twice to where finally we moved to Germany. We were stationed in Germany. We were this close to divorce, and I had had enough. He had had enough. I looked at him and said, well, I'm done. And he looked at me and said, well, I'm done. We couldn't figure out what the problem was because of these invisible wounds, but raising the 6 children in the middle, I always worked. I was a mommy rushing out to work. I never had a problem working. I put those babies in that daycare, and I was off to work. So that's kind of my life was just moving so fast, but the whole while I would see like, wait a minute, this needs my attention, but I really didn't have time. So babies are still going to daycare. He and I are still just at it. We're just growing further and further apart. The whole time, my military heroes, my veteran now, my husband, he never said anything. He never talked about the war. He never said anything. We just grew further and further apart until his military command was going to put him out of the military. We were going to be put out, not retired out, no benefits, no medical care, no nothing. Because of his behavioral issues, his misconduct, he was going to be kicked out of the military. He was one signature away from being put out until one doctor said, there's no way I will sign that paperwork. This man is sick and he needs help. So it was. How did you feel?
How did you feel when you finally found out what was wrong?
It was such a sense of relief because I felt so bad at that moment because I didn't know. I did not know what he was carrying as a veteran, as a soldier at that time. I didn't know. He didn't say anything. He would just say things like, you don't understand, you weren't there. And I would just, your response is, well, no, I'm not military. How would I know? No, I didn't go. So it was like he held it in that you don't know, you don't understand what I'm going through. So at the moment of diagnosis, the doctor called and they began to let me know, we need you to come in, because he wasn't understanding what was going on. He would have these outbursts and they said, listen, we need you to come in, which is I was on a job. We need you to come in and sit so you can better understand where your lives are going from here. So it was a moment of, just a sigh, but that's been the problem for 6 years. That's been the problem.
All right, Betty, we're going to come back to you in a minute. Now, Shelby, I want you to, first of all, I have to say, the last time I saw Shelby was last summer, last June. We had a Working Family Summit, White House sponsored, and we talked about all these issues, everything from equal pay to equal work. Women still only earn 78 cents on the dollar, women of color even less. We talked about raising the minimum wage. We talked about child care and elder care. We talked about workplace flexibility. But when I met Shelby, she was hanging out with the president having lunch. And she was sharing her story with him over lunch. And so now, Shelby, I'd like for you to share your story with the audience.
Well, it started, I was a single mom at the time, and my daughter was diagnosed with gallstones, and of course needing immediate surgery at that point, and also being a caregiver for my father, who is elderly with diabetes, and his vision is going very quickly. And they said if he did not have surgery within a week, he would actually lose complete vision in one of his eyes and would not get that vision back in that eye. So I had my daughter and my dad going into surgery in the same week. Of course, very difficult, and being a single mom, I actually, of course, I had to take time off of work in order to caregive for them. Going back and forth was very difficult, but with having no paid time off during this time and being a single mother, it was very difficult. I had to make some very harsh decisions on just the basic needs that a family has to have weekly. They had to have medication, food. With both of them being ill, you want them comfortable, so you want to be able to provide pillows and comfortable blankets. And I had to decide at that point, because I knew that I was going to have that 2 weeks with no pay. So when I return back to work, I am still going to have no pay because I need to catch up on that time off. So basically a month with no pay. And I couldn't pay my rent. I had to buy them healthy food. I had to make a choice. Am I going to pay my public service bill, or am I going to buy their medications? And of course, my family comes first. And for months, it took me months to get caught up on bills. It just kind of snowballed at that point. And for at least 4 months, I had a 3-day demand note on my door that, you don't pay your rent in 3 days, you guys are going to get evicted. And so it was a very difficult time.
Well, Shelby is one of 43 million Americans who do not have paid sick time. 43 million Americans in the private sector who do not have paid sick time. And right now, as a result of an announcement the President made in the State of the Union, I'm traveling around the country visiting cities and states that are passing legislation that provides for sick time, because Congress has not passed legislation. We've been calling on Congress to provide up to 7 days of paid sick time for every American. But cities and states around the country are responding. In fact, just this week, I was in Philadelphia with Mayor Nutter. Their city council recently passed legislation providing up to 5 days of sick time. And I met a man who I'll never forget, who participated in a roundtable there. And he said he's worked for 23 years. He's never had a single paid sick day. He's never had a paid vacation day. And until the Affordable Care Act, he'd never had health insurance. 23 years in our country. It's pretty astounding. Now, Sheila, let's turn to you for a minute, because you're part of the solution. So if you could take a minute and describe CARE and the work that you do, both here and around the world.
Sure. So I got pregnant in college, and I juggled CARE through grad school, through my career, and then fast forward, when my younger son was born, I begged my parents, I was born and raised in the Philippines, to come from the Philippines to the US to help care for him because I was working at a startup. And my father was carrying our little guy Adam up the stairs, and he fell backwards and had a heart attack. Yeah. And he's fine today, but I can really relate to what Betty and Shelby have shared, which is caregiving is a struggle, not only for me, but for millions of families. And this became my passion. What was difficult for me was I was working at a technology company, and I was using the yellow pages to look for care. There weren't a lot of options out there. I mean, it's such a fragmented industry. And I said to myself, well, if I'm struggling through this, and if I look around, so many women and men are struggling to find care. And I found that when I did the research, $243 billion is spent on care. That's child and senior care. That is as large as the medical device industry, as large as the legal industry. And we're a litigious society. That's a lot of spending. And it happens to be the #1 budgetary item. It's now, for dual-income families, the most expensive item. It's higher than mortgage and rent. But yet, what do? We invest in roads, we invest in bridges, but we don't invest in a care infrastructure. And at work, when we talk about work, family, and flexibility, what's the key driver of absenteeism? What impacts productivity? It's when you don't have peace of mind at home. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. So this became my passion point. What did I want to do? I wanted to get into, when I started the company, I could have done a lot of different things. It was a third internet company. Pain business, they said, or a pleasure business. Did I want to go into something mobile gaming? No, it was about solving problems for people. And care is not a sexy issue, and people don't want to talk about it. And I commend you for sharing your story, because it makes it easier for people to understand that investing in care is an economic imperative for this country, because it drives economic growth. What drives jobs? It's care.
That's exactly right. In 2/3 of our state, child care costs more than in-state tuition. And so oftentimes women choose to stay home, or I shouldn't say choose, they're forced to stay home because they literally can't afford to work. And I was a single mom, and I actually found the woman who took care of my daughter when she was young in a our neighborhood newspaper. And I was terrified, but I'd been searching and searching, and I had to go back to work, and I couldn't find anybody through word of mouth. Yeah. And I finally found the most amazing woman, like Mrs. Doubtfire, if you remember the show. And I could set my watch by her walking in my house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and every morning at about 5 to 8, I thought to myself with panic, what do I do if she doesn't show up? For 18 years, I felt that way. And she was absolutely flawless, and I had parents who lived a mile away, and so if I was late, they would relieve her. I had all the support in the world, and I still felt like I was holding on by my fingertips. And so just imagine what it's like for people who don't have that and who leave their children and are scared to death that either they can't afford it or they're leaving them in circumstances that are not quality. So thank you for everything that you're doing. So Katharine, isn't she amazing? Absolutely. So Katharine, you have figured out the fact that we've got to make it easier for women to get into the workforce, and part of that is being flexible. So describe first for us what motivated you, and then a little bit about what your company does.
So, I mean, much like Sheila, the company was founded out of a very personal problem. I have a co-founder who also had a similar problem. I was in the news business for 11 years, and I was working about 12 hours a day, including a commute tacked on. When I had my baby, about 6 weeks later, after I'd given birth, I said, wow, I really have, two choices here. I can go back to work for 12 hours a day and not really see her, or I can sort of go back to work for 8 hours a day and then be considered someone who's sort of slowly pulling back on her career and losing everything I built for the last 11 years. And I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. We live in an age where, when I was 9 months pregnant, I would haul myself into the office on the New York City subway, sit down, and I would Skype with the guy next to me. It was ridiculous. And so we have all the tools of communication that are out there that actually make me way more productive because I'm working remotely and I'm being valued on my work and not the fact that I've just hauled myself into an office. So we essentially need a third way for women, and that's to allow them to work remotely. And so we went out and launched PowerToFly. We have women in over 93 countries. This includes women in the Middle East who have many, many social barriers to actually going outside of the house. They're working for corporations like Hearst now in New York. We have women all over the United States who are in lower tech areas who are working in high-tech jobs. So it's very exciting because women have essentially been able to trade the half-an-hour commute for going and dropping off a kid for 20 minutes, or going and sitting down and having an after-school snack with a kid. And we're finding that actually women are way, way more productive because they're not wasting time doing things like getting to work every day. So, what we're doing is we're essentially investing in the current talent pool of women. You hear, especially in the tech space, that there aren't enough women in tech. That's simply not true. That's not a pipeline problem. We have more highly skilled women than ever before. The issue is that we are requiring them to go and sit in offices, especially ones that are sort of designed like college campuses, out west. And the number one way that they're sort of valued is based on them physically being there. And so that's what we're doing at PowerToFly. Now, I will say that, in order to work from home, you do need childcare. There's no way. I have a 16-month-old. I was on a conference call yesterday. Within 30 seconds, she came over to my computer and turned my entire keyboard into Russian language characters. So, there's just no way. But, I think it's wonderful that we're talking about childcare as an investment. We think of it as an expense. It is 100% an investment. Every dollar that I spend on the most influential woman in my life right now, Esther, she's from the Philippines, she's been with my family for a long time, I think of it as getting $3 in the future back, right? And so, when my husband says things like, well, why don't we put some money into an MLP, PPO, whatever, I say, no, put money into Esther, because if we pay Esther now, I'm gonna make a lot more money for this family in the future. So we really need to think about, we had guys in Wall Street and Silicon Valley thinking of childcare as an investment vehicle. Just think of the returns. That's
absolutely well put. And isn't that right? Well, and it's also good for the children if they're in quality preschool education. Every dollar we spend on early childhood education saves us $7 down the line. And I think part of what we need to focus on is the economics of the issues that we're talking about. Yes, it's the right thing to do, and it's not just a women's issue anymore. It's a family issue because the women's income is so important to the family unit, and you've got to look at the total cost, and total amount of money that you have left at the end of the month. But we're also finding, interestingly, study after study is showing that companies that appreciate the importance of these family-friendly issues that we've been talking about, from pay to benefits to flexibility to even providing childcare, have a more productive workforce, a more loyal and efficient workforce, less turnover, and ultimately in the private sector, more profitable. And so there's a business case to be made for this as well. So let's return to Betty for a minute. So Betty, you did work, and you were also in school. You worked at a medical center, and you were in school. Tell us a little bit about how you finally realized that you had to be a caregiver, and that your responsibilities really had to focus on Greg.
Yes, I was actually given the choice. I was actually told, if you're out another day, this was in 2009 now, so I've transitioned from those days and things have gotten much better. But at that time, I was told I was in an accounting, position. And they said to me, either if you miss another day, now I have Greg's doctors calling me, you've got to be here, he doesn't understand, he's in denial, he's argumentative with them, he's not accepting what they're saying. So it was a big transition for us. 8 of us are getting ready to get out of the military, because it's a family. One served, but the whole family serves in the military. We were in Germany, and we're getting ready to now come back into the United States. No savings, no nothing. We literally would go to the store with, I remember going with a sandwich bag with dimes and nickels because of his disciplinary actions. I mean, this is where we were, and I was given that choice, and I chose my family. I knew I had to be there for Greg. I had to be there. I had to know where we were going to go next as a family. It was more for me, I didn't want to, my employers weren't so much as saying, well, you got to make this choice, but you know, it's nothing like when you've been off a day and you go in and then there's gossip in the office.
Exactly.
There's whispering, and you know, and I'm just, I don't like things like that, so I believe I did what was best for everyone. They were sad to see me go. I was sad to go, but I was needed in my home. And I thank God today that I did make the choice to step down at that time and take care of my family, because we had to transition. We were such a broken family. And now the process of healing has taken place. We've been restored. His rank was restored. So things are getting much better because of the choice I made to stay in my home and get my house in order first. So now I'm able to be here now looking more at what's before me now, which is kind of, I'm not needed as much in the home. So I'm able to come to places like New York City and enjoy Women in the World with you all.
So as Betty well knows, both First Lady Michelle Obama and Dr. Jill Biden have created an initiative called Joining Forces. And the whole purpose behind Joining Forces is to ensure that our military families know that they're not alone, and that as they have made this great sacrifice for our country, we owe them making sure that we take care of them when they come home. And that includes finding jobs for both the servicemen and women and their spouses. And so I would just make a plea to anybody who's interested in getting involved in our initiative, please do, because Betty has a lot of company out there, and they need us. They need us all to be supportive of them, so please join us. So Shelby, you have a great organization that you're a part of, 9 to 5. Why don't you describe a little bit about the organization and why you decided to participate?
Well, I originally got involved with 9 to 5 upon returning back to work after taking care of my family. I felt as though I was being discriminated against for being a caregiver. And I was reprimanded, and I was talked to about my attendance, and I knew within a week I was going to have to take my daughter and my dad for a follow-up appointment. So I had to call in saying I was ill in order to take them. And so I wanted to know what my rights were, because I felt like I was being discriminated against. And that's when I sought out 9 to 5. And they work on a whole array of women's issues, and they help represent the unrepresented communities throughout Colorado, and they also have other locations in other states. So they're a great organization, and I've partnered up with 9 to 5 in addition with Family Values at Work, and they also co-partner in the same types of issues. So it's 9 to 5 is definitely great.
Thanks for sharing that. So Katharine, you wrote a rather provocative mea culpa about how you had not been sympathetic to working moms. Do you want to describe it? And I mean, I always say that until you have a baby, you just don't know. And by the way, men don't actually have babies. Oftentimes you'll say, the men will say, well, we had a baby. No, you actually didn't have a baby. We had the baby.
Or they say they're babysitting. I love when husbands say, I'm babysitting.
Have you ever heard a woman say she was babysitting? No. And while I'm on this rant, when men leave the office, I'm not done yet. When men leave the office to go to a Little League game or take their child to the doctor, which rarely happens because women are the primary ones who make the appointments and take both their children and their parents, what happens? They say, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't he a wonderful dad? You know I'm right. You know I'm right.
Yeah.
When a man leaves or when a woman leaves early, is she really committed to her job? Is she, does she really understand how important this is? Exactly, right?
Yeah,
well,
it's true. It's amazing. Yeah.
That's the way they roll. All right, Sheila, back to you for a second. Sorry, I digress. Couldn't help myself. Tell us how you market and how you find, how you make the match. How do you really, what's the nitty-gritty of how your business operates? Don't give away any trade secrets, but how did you grow so exponentially so quickly? What's your strategy?
There's basically two sides of the marketplace. There's caregivers and then there's families. And there's a huge overlap of women on both sides, and it's not a surprise. And speaking of just talking about caregiving, because of the stories we just heard, how many of you have kids? Okay.
We can't really see you, but we know you're out there.
How many of you have nieces and nephews? Okay. How many of you have been kids? So guess what? Caregiving applies to everybody because there is a senior care tsunami coming. There is. Over 50% of us between 40 and 50 years old are already in sandwich generations, trying to struggle with care. And so guess what? From a marketing perspective, to Valerie's question, it's not that difficult for us to actually convince people for something that is a critical need. Because to have a great job, you want great care, and to afford great care, you must have a job. There is this codependency that people have because that's what grows the economy. That's what makes livelihoods. Whether you're working from home or at work and you're going, you need care. And so for us, from a marketing perspective, it's very clear. One of the disheartening things is that a lot of people think this is only a female issue. It is actually everybody's issue, to the question that I asked you. And then the second thing that's disheartening is that we don't invest in care. Do you know that nail salons in this country are audited more than daycares? Wow. Did you know that? And the things that we hear about, the fact that we don't have maternity leave as mandatory in this country, forget about paternity leave. I mean, we can go from policy to standards to training caregivers. We've got a crisis coming. This is an economic imperative. We must care, no pun intended, but we really do.
Well, you're absolutely right. And we are the only developed country in the world, I mean, like the entire world, that does not have paid leave. I mean, every single developed country has it. And so as we're in a global marketplace and we're trying to compete, we have to recognize that we better get with it if U.S. companies want to be able to attract and retain the best talent, because as Katharine well knows, and certainly Sheila knows as well, you could really work from anywhere all over the world. And you're going to go, if you're in demand, wherever you get the best opportunity to thrive. That's what it's really all about. All right, so we have like a few seconds left, lightning round. Whoever puts their hand up first gets to answer the question. What more should we be doing to put the spotlight on this issue? We've got a pretty big spotlight on it in this crowd, but the fact of the matter is too many people, like all of us, suffer in silence for far too long, and we think we're the only one. And we think that we're supposed to be able to do it all when it's absolutely impossible to do it all without some support. So Who wants to address really quickly, in 10 seconds? Katherine has her hand up first. You can tell she's a kid in class.
Okay,
what
10
do we
seconds.
need to be doing?
What do we ought to be doing? Again, think of it as an investment. We need to be coming up with certain investment vehicles. We need to look at the tax structure. I know President Obama put out a $100 million fund, I believe. So, what are your ideas? I have a lot of half-baked ideas, but really, it's an investment. Every dollar you put in today, think of it as making a lot more money in the future for women, and that's going to help the economy overall, and we really need that. So
that was pretty good. She was almost in 10 seconds, right? So to continue this conversation further, I'm actually on Twitter, which my daughter finds hard to believe, but VJ44, if you have suggestions or advice, things that you think that we should be doing, both at the federal government or ways that we can use the bully pulpit to put the spotlight on this issue, send your suggestions to me, and please join me in thanking our terrific panel.